So this is a pretty interesting development with Tucker Carlson. Now, if you don't know, Tucker Carlson went after Sidney Powell, who is a former attorney who is now working with the Trump campaign, who made this incredibly bombastic claim. The incredibly bombastic claim is that at least 1 million votes were flipped by vote machine counting algorithms. It's hilariously stupid. It's incredibly bombastic. Anybody with two brain cells to rub together knows that it's completely false. But Tucker Carlson was basically like, hey man, we kept asking for evidence. Please give us some evidence. We want some evidence. And he basically explained that she refused to do so. She refused to give any evidence despite being asked to do so very nicely, very kindly, very politely. And what ended up happening was his fans completely turned on him. His own supporters were like, oh, well, why would she give you the evidence? She's waiting for the courts. That's what she's doing. Why would she play her hand and give the lefties time to cover their tracks? Complete delusionalness. Tucker Carlson is kind of walking this back now, so I'm going to play you this clip of him kind of walking it back.
Well, last night, in a segment about voter fraud and investigations into it, we told you about Sidney Powell, the former federal prosecutor, and her claim that roughly 7 million votes were secretly changed on election night by rigged vote counting software. Well, in the last 24 hours since we did that, we've heard from a lot of people about that segment, including people in the White House and people close to the president. Like us, they have concluded that this election was not fair. Like us, they are willing to believe any explanation for what happened. Like us, they have not seen a single piece of evidence showing that software changed votes. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. It might have happened. It means they haven't seen any evidence that it happened. And by they, we are including other members of Donald Trump's own legal team. They have not seen Powell's evidence either. No testimony from employees inside the software companies, no damning internal documents, no copies of the software itself. So that's where we are. Sidney Powell came on Fox this morning and suggested we may not have to wait much longer. I fully expect, she says, that we will be able to prove all of it in a court within the next 2 weeks. Well, as far as we're concerned, that is great news. If Sidney Powell can prove the technology companies switched millions of votes and stole a presidential election, she will have almost single-handedly uncovered the greatest crime in the history of this country, and no one will be more grateful for that than us.
So as you can see, what's happening in this Tucker Carlson segment is he's basically walking back his comments. He's now being more apologetic. He's kind of apologizing, basically saying, oh, you know, there could be evidence, but we haven't seen it. And, oh, she's claiming that she's going to give it to the courts, and there's nobody but us that will be happier to see that. Which means he is responding to the backlash. A lot of Republicans were pissed off at him. This is how delusional the MAGA cult, and honestly, at this point, it might even be going beyond the MAGA cult. It might just be Republicans in general, but it's a serious delusional cult, and it's actually pretty scary. But check this out. Steven Crowder called out Tucker Carlson. He says, damage control. We've invited Sidney Powell on the show, and it was made very clear that the evidence is for court, not broadcast. Attacking her credibility for that was petty and selfish. So I don't know if Steven Crowder sees Tucker Carlson as a foe in the media sphere, but it's interesting to see Republicans basically eating each other alive here. So it's hilarious. It is damage control, but it's because there are crazy Republicans, crazy MAGAites that are sort of causing him to do this. And I guess Steven Crowder is part of that cult, essentially. But what it means is, in this certain scenario, Tucker Carlson was willing to at least ask for evidence, whereas you are just a sort of MAGA cult drone who is completely void of any journalistic integrity whatsoever. I think this is a really interesting response. It's actually from this guy named Nuance Bro. You might know him. He says, so you believe her, Steven? You think in 2 weeks she'll, quote, release the Kraken, so to speak, and that it'll overturn the results of the election and show millions of votes were switched by Dominion? So that's a really good question, man. Honestly, if you genuinely believe that, you probably need antipsychotic medications because you are completely insane. There's absolutely zero chance that that's going to happen at all. And the idea that Sidney Powell has any evidence for this is hilarious. It's laughably insane. The idea that there were vote counting machines that flipped the votes. It's really basic to see what happened. And that's the thing. There's no irregularities. The starting point of getting to this conclusion is automatically flawed because the sort of starting point to get to that conclusion would have to be that there were some kind of irregularities in the first place. There were no irregularities. It was very clear. We all knew this was how it's going to play out. So I don't know if Republicans are playing dumb or if they genuinely just were that dumb and didn't know. We all knew what was going to happen. Republicans vote in person already. They vote in person for vast majority. Vast majority of them vote in person, not by mail. But with COVID, what it did was it exacerbated the situation. So Democrats already, disproportionately voted by mail. With COVID, they're going to vote even harder via mail, okay? So what does that mean? That means that Republicans are voting in person, which means their votes are going to be counted first, and then the Democrats will be counted afterwards because there were mail-in ballots. Now, in states like Florida or North Carolina, they had already made the decision 2 weeks before. We're going to start counting the mail-in ballots 2 weeks before. That was a smart thing to do. But Republicans in these states like Pennsylvania, they refuse to come to an agreement with Democrats to begin counting earlier. Do you want to know why? It's because of this right here, because they're trying to make up this bullshit scenario that there's somehow some irregularities. The results perfectly matched up what was expected to happen, okay? There was incredible voter turnout. That incredible voter turnout mostly came via mail. And so when you saw these gigantic leads for Trump, why do you think that is? It's because they're counting all the in-person votes first. So you would also have to have like this vast conspiracy in all these different states. It's hilariously stupid. So from the jump, this should be disqualified because the starting point is already, it's a false premise, the idea that there's some irregularities. This follows exactly what anybody with two brain cells rubbed together knew was going to happen and how it was going to play out. So it's completely ridiculous. And if you genuinely believe this is going to happen, this is honestly sadder than the way Hillary Clinton supporters were back in 2016. This is really embarrassing. But it's also interesting because I think Steven Crowder might have something against Tucker Carlson. I'm not sure how common it is for Steven Crowder to attack other Republican pundits. Tucker Carlson may also be trying to position himself for a 2024 Republican Party run for president, so that's also a possibility as well. That might be the reason why, he is walking backwards and doing this. But it's definitely very interesting to see, man. It's interesting because it does appear that the MAGA cult sort of really heavily is a Republican cult rather than just Trump support, like diehard Trump supporters. It's really sad to see, and it's actually really scary. The idea that idiots actually think some random person named Sidney Powell, who's looks like some, Karen, has the technology know-how to know that, vote machine algorithms change these votes, and she's going to show it in court, that's for sure. I'm not going to ask for any questions, I'm not going to ask for any evidence, I'm just going to believe that it's going to show up in court. If you genuinely believe that, man, you're such a moron, dude. Holy crap.